It is time now for Campaign Chronicles. It is time for Campaign Chronicles, our daily look at the French presidential race. With just 11 days to go, the candidates are getting more and more worried about potentially low turnout, trying to sell themselves to the groups least likely to vote. Well, the incumbent Nicolas Sarkozy paid a visit yesterday to one of Paris's rundown banlieues, where abstention is expected to be high. For more, I'm joined by Elena Casas, who's our press reviewer. Elena, it was a flying visit that Mr. Sarkozy made.
Yes, very brief visit to Drancy in the Paris banlieue yesterday. Also something of an afterthought, the press is speculating, because no journalists were told about it until about 2 hours before he arrived there. So some newspapers this morning speculating that might be because he's had some pretty bad receptions on visits to the banlieue in the past. So he was kind of hoping to reduce the number of people who might turn out to boo him, as has previously happened when he's visited these areas, which are, of course, the kind of poorer parts around France's big cities, especially Paris, where the population is overwhelmingly ethnic minority coming from immigration, where lots of people live in council housing, where unemployment is high, and where, as you said, people aren't necessarily expected to turn out to vote. Now, his visit yesterday was a response to the 48-hour marathon banlieue tour undertaken by his socialist rival François Hollande at the weekend. He visited banlieues not only in Paris, but in the south, in Toulouse and in Marseille this weekend. Now, the papers, the Nouvel Observateur there, is saying, really, the subject of banlieue, which were talked about a lot by Ségolène Royal in the 2007 campaign, seem to have been virtually absent from this year's race. The candidates have had very little to say about voters there, and they seem to have realised, with just, as you say, 11 days to go, that maybe they should create some proposals specifically for them. So Sarkozy, of course, has also been accused by the Muslim population, which is a high percentage in the banlieues, of trying to stigmatise Islam. So some of his proposals about things like halal meat have not helped improve his popularity among those voters particularly. So yesterday he met imams, he met religious figures with whom he has had, as we say, a tricky relationship. A number of high-profile imams have spoken out against some of the things he said about Islam. But yesterday he was very much trying to build bridges. Here he is.
I've come here to meet with the leaders of the religious communities. This city has a painful history. The rabbi, the imam and the pastor here have had the wisdom to talk together, to bring together their communities and reject any kind of fundamentalism.
Sarkozy speaking yesterday, and of course he doesn't have the best relationship with the banlieues, with the best track record.
No, indeed. Remember in 2005, after those riots, when he was Interior Minister, when he said he was going to clean them out with a pressure hose? That's one of the many things the Huffington Post is reminding us today when they go back over Sarkozy's relationship with the banlieue. When he was elected the last time round, he promised a Marshall Plan for the banlieue, which was going to create 250,000 jobs for the young unemployed. That was quietly shelved last year, although it was announced to much fanfare in 2007 when Fadela Amara, herself a woman who grew up in the banlieue, who came from immigration and who had become well known as the leader of Ni Pute Ni Soumise, which is a feminist organisation. She was appointed as a minister for cities. She unfortunately resigned from the government in 2010, and since then the banlieue agenda seems to have been put on the back burner, the Huffington Post explains, although the government has announced a number of urban renovation projects that have been meant to be knocking down insalubrious housing and building better things and so on, although they reckon 5 out of every 6 projects that have been approved are still on the drawing board because there isn't enough funds to actually build them. So a number of people feeling rather disappointed by Sarkozy's record then on the subject of banlieue. Libération say he has come up with a new plan to try and solve the housing crisis in those areas, and he's copied it from Margaret Thatcher in the 1980s. He wants people living in council housing apparently to be able to buy their council houses, just like she did, of course, but they say that that policy is often held responsible in Britain for why there's so little council housing now. So Libération, at least the left-wing paper, is not very convinced that that would be a good idea to copy. Now, what do the actual people living there think? Rue 89, the website, has spoken to some women there who say they do feel stigmatised by the things that Sarkozy has said about Islam. They feel he's trying to put them in a box and put a label on them, and the candidate that most of them wanted to vote for was Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the far-left candidate, who they reckon is speaking more clearly to those on very low incomes. But how then has his policy on immigration gone down with those outside the banlieue amongst the wider spread of French voters who he's trying to sell to, of course, trying to pitch to with his comments on Islam? Well, we went to speak to some ordinary voters to see what they thought.
Il faudrait qu'on commence à parler de l'histoire de ces migrants Et arrêter de stigmatiser en fait les minorités sociales et ces jeunes qui sont finalement juste porteurs d'un passé extrêmement douloureux de parents qui ont vécu dans des situations absolument dramatiques.
Il y a beaucoup trop de monde, étrangers, on n'a pas la même culture. Et comme ils restent avec leur culture et ils ne s'intègrent pas vraiment, ça me paraît difficile. Je crois qu'il faut un petit peu limiter les dégâts là.
Je pense que la religion...
Well, you always seem to have mislaid the translations for our voters there.
Which
I'm
is fine
sorry.
if you happen to speak French, not so good if you don't. We'll hopefully hear from them a little later during the day. Thanks very much, Elena Casas. That was Campaign Chronicles with just 11 days to go before the first round of